It all started with Cosmo, our family cat. Cosmo had always slept in the basement, night after night, without any trouble. My parents made sure to put him down there every night because they couldn't stand the fur he left on the furniture. They loved him, but waking up to cat hair on their bed was not something they enjoyed. So, every evening, they scooped him up and placed him gently on the landing at the top of the basement stairs. Cosmo would then stroll down on his own and settle on any couch or chair he liked. That was just how things were, and it never seemed to bother Cosmo. Even though he was part outdoor cat and had a habit of waking up early to go outside, this routine worked well. If someone forgot to put him downstairs, we knew what to expect: Cosmo yowling at 3 a.m, begging to be let out into the dark night. My parents didn't take any chances, so every night, like clockwork, Cosmo spent his nights in the basement, and the house stayed peaceful. The basement was the biggest room in the house. With all that open space, I used to think Cosmo loved being down there. It gave him room to roam, and he seemed content for years. But then, something changed. And when it did, it was subtle at first, so subtle that none of us noticed it right away. It wasn't just Cosmo's behavior that shifted, it was the whole mood of the house. Something was off, but we were too busy to think much about it. That's how it began, with Cosmo acting just a little bit strange. A small shift that would soon grow into something much more disturbing. And as things started to unravel, we realized too late that something far more unsettling was happening under our roof, something we never saw coming. The first strange thing happened one night when I put Cosmo on the landing by the basement door, like always. But instead of walking down the stairs, he just sat there, meowing softly. I stood there for a second, confused. This wasn't normal for him. He usually went down right away without a fuss. I thought maybe he was just being stubborn, so I shut the door and went to get some water from the kitchen. But as soon as I reached the sink, I heard him again, his meows, louder this time, coming from behind the closed door. It felt odd, but I figured it was nothing serious. When I opened the door to check on him, Cosmo darted out into the living room, like he was chasing something I couldn't see. His dish was full, so it wasn't hunger. I picked him up, put him back on the landing, and shut the door again, hoping he'd finally settle. But the next night, the same thing happened. He just wouldn't go down, sitting there at the top of the stairs, as if something was waiting for him down below. It was the first time I felt a strange sense of unease, but I shrugged it off. It was just Cosmo, after all. Or so I thought. The next few nights, things got worse. Cosmo wouldn't just hesitate at the top of the stairs, he stopped going down altogether. He meowed endlessly until someone opened the basement door, but the moment it was open, he wouldn't go near it. One day, he refused to come inside the house at all. He just curled up outside on the doormat, ignoring us no matter how much we called him. When I finally carried him inside, he seemed restless, pacing around like he didn't know where to settle. That night, I let him sleep in my room, thinking it would calm him down. It worked for a while. But now my dad was upset, saying someone kept leaving the basement door open, letting the cold air escape. No one admitted to it, and I assumed it was just my sister being careless. But deep down, I felt there was more to it. Cosmo was acting like something in the basement scared him, and I was starting to wonder if he wasn't the only one. A few days later, we found out what we thought was the reason for Cosmo's behavior. The basement was crawling with fleas. They were everywhere, hidden in the carpets and corners. We were all disgusted and confused. Cosmo always wore a flea collar, and we had never had a problem like this before. My dad blamed my mom for not changing the collar on time, even though she swore she had. Determined to fix the problem, My dad went into full cleaning mode. He vacuumed every inch, sprayed flea killers, and scrubbed the entire room down. He told us to stay out of the basement for a few days so the chemicals could do their job. We all assumed the problem would be over soon, and with it, Cosmo's strange behavior. But deep down, something about the fleas still didn't sit right with me. It felt too sudden, too random, like there was something more we weren't seeing. A few nights later, just as things seemed to be settling down, something else strange happened. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I noticed a light flickering under my bedroom door. It wasn't steady, more like someone was flipping the hallway switch on and off. At first, I thought it might be my dad getting up for a glass of water, but the flickering went on for too long. I stayed frozen, watching the light dance under the door, my heart pounding. Every time I told myself to get up and check, fear held me back. After what felt like forever, the flickering stopped. I kept staring at the door, waiting for something else to happen, but everything went quiet. I didn't sleep much that night, and when morning came, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, something we didn't understand. A couple of days later, I finally went down to the basement to see if the fleas were gone. But as soon as I stepped off the last stair, I noticed they were still there, crawling in small clusters on the floor. It didn't make sense after all the deep cleaning. They should have been gone by now. I felt uneasy, like something was off, but I tried to brush it aside. I went back upstairs and called my dad to tell him what I saw. He said to give it more time, that the chemicals would eventually kill the remaining fleas. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't feel right. The infestation wasn't normal. It was like the basement had become a space where things refused to leave. And I couldn't ignore the thought creeping into my mind. Maybe fleas weren't the only thing hiding down there. The next day after school, I decided to check the far end of the basement, where we stored old boxes and tools. I thought maybe some animal had gotten in and died, leaving behind the fleas. As soon as I opened the door to the storage room, a horrible smell hit me, thick and rotten, like something had been decaying for days. It made my eyes water, but I kept going. At the back of the room, there was a crawl space we rarely used. It was small, dark, and connected to the house's plumbing. As I stepped closer, the stench got worse. Then I heard its soft, steady breathing. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, like someone was hiding just out of sight. My stomach dropped, and every instinct told me to leave. Before I could react, something moved fast inside the crawl space. A hand shot out, reaching toward me. I jumped back, heart racing, and sprinted up the stairs without looking back. I slammed the door shut behind me, my chest heaving, and called the police. Whatever was down there wasn't just a pest, it was something, or someone, much worse. When the police arrived, they searched the basement thoroughly, but no one was there. All they found was some old food wrappers and empty chip bags hidden in the crawl space. It seemed like someone had been living down there and escaped through the storm door before the police showed up. They told us it was probably a homeless person seeking shelter, but the thought of someone secretly living in our basement was terrifying. After that, my parents made sure the basement door stayed locked at all times. Even though the person was gone, Cosmo still refused to go near the basement stairs. The whole experience left us shaken, knowing that whoever had been down there had seen more of our lives than we ever realized. And even now, every time I pass that basement door, I get this uneasy feeling, like something from that crawl space never truly left. Every Halloween, my parents turned our basement into a haunted house. It wasn't anything fancy, just some old decorations, fake spider webs, and strobe lights, but it always attracted a crowd. I guess being an only child had its perks. My parents put a lot of effort into making sure I had fun, and the haunted house was part of that. The event wasn't just for fun, though. To enter, visitors had to donate canned food, and every year, my parents gave everything collected to the local food bank. They made flyers and handed them out at my school and a few others nearby. Most of the people who came were parents and kids from our neighborhood, but there were always a few strangers mixed in. My parents didn't mind. They believed the more people who came, the more food we could gather for those in need. It was a good cause, and we looked forward to it every year. But that year, something felt off. None of us realized it right away. The night started just like any other Halloween, full of laughter and excitement. But as more people arrived and the basement filled with visitors, we had no idea that someone unexpected had already slipped inside, someone who would change everything. That evening, we got busy setting everything up in the basement. My cousins Jeff, Rick, Chaz, and Eric came over to help, just like they did every year. They dressed in matching anonymous masks, those creepy white ones with blank expressions, ready to jump out and scare people. We filled the basement with decorations, old spider webs hanging from corners, flickering strobe lights, and creepy props scattered around. It wasn't professional, but it worked. The basement's dim lighting and creaky floors made it feel spooky enough on its own. As the sun went down, people started arriving. Kids ran through the basement, screaming and laughing, while their parents followed behind, holding their phones and recording everything. We had a steady crowd early in the night, which made my parents happy. The more chaotic it got, the better it seemed for the event. But with so many people packed in, it became harder to tell who was supposed to be there and who wasn't. Before the event was in full swing, a man showed up alone. He wasn't with any kids, which felt strange since this was mostly a family event. He told my parents that his wife would bring their daughter later, but he wanted to drop off some food cans early. My parents thanked him and took the cans, but something about the whole interaction felt off. The man lingered a little too long, standing awkwardly like he had no reason to leave. Eventually, he got the hint and walked out, but the uneasy feeling stayed. My parents shrugged it off, assuming he was just trying to be helpful. At that moment, it seemed harmless, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. The basement was crowded with kids running around, shouting and laughing. Everything seemed normal until one of my friends came up to me, crying. She said someone in an anonymous mask had grabbed her wrist and tried to pull her into a closet. At first, I thought maybe she was just scared and overreacting, but the look on her face told me otherwise. She was genuinely terrified. I tried to calm her down, telling her it was probably one of my cousins playing a prank. But something didn't sit right. My cousins liked scaring people, sure, but they would never take things that far. I knew I had to tell my parents right away. My parents took the situation seriously and went downstairs to ask my cousins if they had seen anything strange. Jeff, Rick, and Chaz were still at their spots, scaring visitors, and all of them swore they hadn't done anything like what my friend described. That's when my parents noticed Eric was missing. Just as they started to worry, Eric ran down the stairs, looking confused. He told us he had taken a quick bathroom break upstairs, and when he returned, his anonymous mask was gone. He thought one of the others had taken it as a joke, but nobody admitted to touching it. At that moment, alarm bells went off in my parents' heads. They decided to end the event early, asking everyone to leave, just in case something wasn't right. That night, I was exhausted and fell asleep quickly, but something woke me up a few hours later. At first, it was just a soft tapping on my bedroom window. I stayed still, hoping it would stop, and after a few minutes, it did. Relieved, I closed my eyes again, but just as I started to drift off, the sound came back, this time louder, with an urgent scratching noise. My heart pounded, and every instinct told me to stay in bed. But curiosity got the better of me. I threw off the covers and yanked open the curtains. My breath caught in my throat. Right on the other side of the glass, inches from my face, was someone wearing an anonymous mask, staring straight at me. I screamed as loud as I could, and within seconds, my parents rushed into the room. I pointed frantically at the window, but by the time they looked, the masked figure was gone. We called the police, and they searched the yard and the area around our house. But they found nothing, no footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing out of the ordinary. For weeks after that, my parents went into full protection mode. They installed security cameras, locked every window, and even put alarms on the upstairs ones. The police said it was probably just a prank, but we knew better. Something wasn't right, and even though everything looked calm, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. A few months passed, and life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be. One afternoon, I came home from school, dropped my bag on the floor, and headed to my room. That's when I saw it. Lying on my bed was an anonymous mask, the same kind my cousins wore that night. But this one was different. Across the forehead, written in black marker, was my name. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. My parents called the police again, but just like before, there wasn't much they could do except file another report. We added more security, but even that didn't bring me peace. Every night, I lay awake, listening to every small sound, waiting for the tapping or scratching to return. And to this day, I still wonder, was it really over? Or was the person behind that mask just waiting for the right moment to come back? I needed the job, no matter how bad it seemed. Money was tight, and options were even tighter. That's how I found myself working at a small restaurant in a rough part of town. The place wasn't terrible, but it had an uneasy vibe from the start. The manager, Carlos, didn't help much. He was the kind of guy you just couldn't trust. He gave me the worst shifts, made me stay late, and never cared about following rules. I knew something was off about him, but I didn't have the luxury of being picky. Working nights seemed like a decent trade-off at first. It gave me most of the day to myself, and I figured it couldn't be that bad. But as the days passed, I realized that staying late in that empty restaurant wasn't just boring, it was unsettling. Something about the silence felt heavy, like the building was hiding secrets. I told myself I just needed to push through. I needed the money, even if something didn't feel quite right. It was during one of those late shifts when I first heard it. At first, it was just a faint thud coming from somewhere beneath the kitchen floor. I stopped mopping and listened, trying to figure out if I had imagined it. Then came the scraping, soft but steady, like something was being dragged across the floor below. The sounds weren't loud, but they were enough to make me uneasy. I tried to brush it off, thinking it might be the pipes or an animal outside. But the noises kept coming, always when the place was quiet, as if waiting for the right moment to be noticed. I told myself it was nothing and went back to cleaning. But deep down, I knew something about it didn't feel normal. The next day, I decided to tell Carlos about the strange noises. I figured he'd at least check it out or call someone to take a look. But as soon as I mentioned it, he brushed me off like it was nothing. "Don't worry about it," he said with a shrug, barely looking up. Then he added something that made my stomach twist. "There's no basement here." I knew that wasn't true. I had seen the window wells around the back of the building, the kind that only made sense if there was a basement. Carlos's quick dismissal only made me more suspicious. Something was definitely down there, and he didn't want me to find out. But I kept quiet, knowing if I pushed too hard, I might lose the job. For now, all I could do was wait and see if the noises came back. The noises didn't stop. If anything, they became more frequent, always late at night when the restaurant was dead quiet. Each time I heard them, it sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was down there, and Carlos knew it. His warning to stay focused on my job only made me more determined to find out what was going on. I decided to check the windows around the back of the building. If there really wasn't a basement, why would those windows even be there? My heart raced as I made up my mind. I knew I had to be careful, but the need to know the truth was stronger than the fear growing inside me. One night, after closing up, I finally decided to check the window wells. With my phone flashlight in hand, I crouched down and peered through the dusty glass. At first, I couldn't see anything, just darkness and the faint outline of shelves and pipes. I was about to give up when, suddenly, a light flickered on inside the basement for a split second. It was just long enough to make out shapes, boxes, old furniture, and something else I couldn't quite place. Before I could look closer, the light snapped off, leaving me staring into the black again. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away from the window. I didn't tell Carlos what I saw. Something told me that whatever was down there, I wasn't supposed to know about it. The next night, I couldn't resist. I went back to the window. This time, I crouched lower, pressing my face closer to the glass, hoping to catch a better look. My hands were shaking, but I had to know. As I leaned in, something shifted in the darkness. That's when I saw it, a man's face suddenly pressed against the glass from the other side. His hair was wild, his face dirty and pale, and his eyes were wide and unblinking. He gave me a twisted smile that sent a shiver down my spine. I stumbled backward, barely able to breathe. That wasn't just a stranger. It was someone who had been down there for a long time, and I had no idea how much he had seen or what he wanted. The next day, I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. I told Carlos everything: the noises, the flickering light, and the man I saw staring through the window. I expected him to deny it, maybe even laugh it off. But instead, his face went pale, and he let out a heavy sigh. He sat me down and confessed the truth. The man in the basement was his brother. Carlos admitted his brother was mentally unstable and dangerous, and he had been hiding him down there to keep him out of trouble. The basement had been sealed off years ago, but Carlos found a way to let him live there, away from everyone's eyes. He begged me not to tell anyone, promising it was under control. I didn't know what to say. I felt trapped, like walking away from this job wasn't as simple as I thought. A few weeks later, after another long shift, I was heading to my car when I noticed someone standing at the edge of the parking lot, just beyond the trees. My heart sank. Even in the dark, I knew it was him, the same man from the basement. He stood there, watching me, then started moving toward me with an awkward, limping gait. Panic set in. I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the car as he got closer. Just as I yanked the door open, he reached the window, slamming his hand against the glass. His face was twisted into that same eerie smile, dirty and wild. I jumped inside, locked the doors, and sped off without looking back. That was the last night I worked at the restaurant. From the safety of my apartment, I called the police, but I knew I could never go back. I don't know what happened to Carlos or his brother after that, and I don't want to find out. Even now, I can't help but wonder if they'll come looking for me one day.